Good morning and welcome once again. I'm Roger Flaxman, and with me as ever is our senior consultant.
In our profession, with the right knowledge and experience, the sky's the limit. And whilst we know the letters after your name are an important sign of standards, professionalism and trust, it's not all we're about. We're also focused on furthering our members' careers by giving you access to a community of like-minded professionals, all bound by the same code of ethics. There's newsletters, technical papers, podcasts, and so much more great content to facilitate your CPD. Like hundreds of regular face-to-face meetings and digital events, making it easy to stay on top of industry trends and to network with members all over the country. Our societies mean that whether you're a broker, claims, or underwriting professional, our approach is tailored for you. And with membership, you can work towards chartered status for a place amongst the experts in your field. If you have knowledge to share or want to learn, you can sign up to our e-mentoring platform to connect and exchange ideas and support. And not forgetting the perks. Save on a range of products and services, or access our legal helpline for free confidential advice. Get more from your membership today.
Good morning and welcome once again. I'm Roger Flaxman, and with me as ever is our senior consultant, Michael Wilson, who I know is equally well known to a large number of you. Before we start, I'd just like to say, or we would just like to say, how much we appreciate the feedback that you're giving to us after each of our webinars. It's reassuring that we're obviously hitting the spot on the subject matter. It also helps us to focus on what we're going to present next. So please keep your feedback coming, and if there's something you particularly like us to tackle, just let us know. I'd also like to thank Anthony Dallison, our MD, and Eleanor Appleton, our production manager, who between them, they provide the slides and the visuals and help to make sure logistics work well in partnership with the CII. Eleanor is an up-and-coming actress, and she's done a wonderful job in presenting our YouTube channel, most of which I think most of you probably haven't seen it. You can find the address of it on our final slide today. You might find the YouTube channel useful for some of your customers, because the principle of it is to describe insurance matters to customers in their language rather than in ours. If you're very observant and you've seen the YouTube channel, you will might be able to pick up Eleanor, who's in a current TV program called Compulsion on Channel 5. See if you can find her. Now, our particular aim in this series of webinars is to feed back to you, industry, the experiences we have in our everyday claim dispute resolution work. Everything we present is based upon actual claims. It's not just theoretical opinion. The reality of insurance claims is that when they go wrong, consequences for policyholders can be absolutely devastating. It's one of the less pleasant aspects of our daily life, is that we see a lot of devastated policyholders. Just imagine tomorrow you lost your home. What would you do the next day? That's the reality for some of the customers that they have to face when not only have they lost their home, but the insurers say, sorry, we're not claim. A house with terminal subsidence, or a house that's burnt to a cinder, or has blood and it's uninhabitable, is no longer a home. And very, very few people have the resources to recover from that without the insurance they relied upon. Nowadays, a minor error made in the buying process or a lapse in compliance with a contractual term in a policy give an insurer a reason to deny indemnity or even to void the policy. And suddenly, the insured's world becomes a cauldron. For people in business, it's equally devastating when insurance fails to come to the rescue, because their income is cut off, everyone they employ, their customers and their suppliers, all get to know about the insurance company that says no. In 2019, a 200-year-old family business in rural England was literally blown to pieces, an unexplained explosion of an empty barrel in a small machine workshop. No one can actually say what caused it. The forensic fire investigators, the fire brigade, nobody quite understands it. And because of that, the insurer has said, we're not paying. Now, the devastation caused to the family and to the rural community that relied upon that business is beyond adequate description. The claim is very large, and the insurer, through their lawyer, is simply standing firm. Now, I mention this because in the age of technology, in this age of technology, we are increasingly remote from our customers. And it's only too easy to forget that our decisions as an industry have as much impact on the policyholder as a motorway pileup or an enemy missile destroying our home or our business. It is that devastating. When you lose something, or says no. We really should think about that in making decisions in the industry based upon simple technical construction or policy that have life-changing consequences for the policyholders, their family, and all those. Now, we've recently experienced the government locking down the whole of the nation on the grounds of one death from COVID, one death too many. We should remember that one denial of cover for a policyholder whose destiny and that of their family will be changed by our decision is not far removed from one death too many. In the absence of fraud, dishonesty, or a blatant and relevant breach of a policy obligation, the routine use of the law to avoid a claim ought to be avoided for the sake of reputation, effectively, of our industry profession. Just because a policy wording gives an insurer a right to deny indemnity, it doesn't mean they have to use it. And Michael and I see time and time, in fact we saw one yesterday, which is absolutely devastating. A stupid decision by an insurer. We can take this decision, we've decided to do so. It's going to wreck a young family's life at 20 or 30. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. It's not a matter for the FOS. The point is, these things are happening more and more. And one of the reasons they're happening is that technology is moving us as an industry further away from the customer. And you only need a very slight mishap or misunderstanding somewhere in the technology, the quotation process, and it can, and we're forgetting that. We're dealing with it. Now, today's webinar is based upon an incident that devastated a 30-year-old family building business. The business employed subcontractors. Had a broker for over 10 years that looked after their insurance. But when a fire caused by a defective security light destroyed a house that had recently been built, the loss adjuster discovered that on the day of the fire, the insured had 11 subcontractors working across 5 separate buildings. And that proved to be one contractor too many. The policy was voided, and you'll see why shortly. This is a conundrum that comes up regularly in our portfolio of clients. So we thought it was well worth the time to bring this to your attention, understand what is going on with the insurance of subcontractors, so that collectively we might do something about it. So, Michael, let's make a start. Would you like to commence with the learning?
Yes, thank you for that introduction, Roger. And just before we look at the learning objectives, can I just mention that we don't have a CII host with us today, so we might have a bit of difficulty dealing with your questions, but please still post your questions on your screen, and we'll probably pick up as many questions as we can towards the end of the webinar. So the learning objectives today are, as shown on the slide here, to review the insurer's obligation to make a fair presentation of the risk under the Insurance Act, to review the information an underwriter will expect to see when considering a risk for a contractor, to identify and understand the confusion that easily arises when declaring the number of employees and subcontractors, and to appreciate the differences between the categories of employees and subcontractors. Now, we'll mention during the webinar today the fact that we've produced a fact sheet on this, which will be made available to you later. And I'm just going to read the introduction to the subject. And it reads as follows. Experience of claims involving contractors demonstrates how little time and thought is given at the point of sale of the insurance relating to cover in respect of the use of subcontractors. One reason for this is perhaps the commoditization of the modern insurance process, which tends to focus on the speed and ease of transaction for the customer. This applies equally to the broker using a platform that simply requires populating with answers to predetermined questions. So why is this important to consider? Why is it important to consider subcontractors? Well, the typical insured relies upon labour-only subcontractors and bona fide subcontractors to sustain its business and meet targets and standards. The actions, inactions, faults, and failures of subcontractors will invariably involve the principal, that is, the main contractor, in litigation. And it is to the insurer that they must turn for the protection and cost of legal advice. If the circumstances of the subcontractors have not been fairly and accurately disclosed to the insurer, the insured can be left high and dry and uninsured. A key problem that befalls disputed claims in this area concerns the questions that are asked of the insured about subcontractors at the point of sale of the policy. The modern process of insurance sales does not direct the mind of the proposer to the mind of the underwriter. So what does this mean, you may well ask? Well, we need to look at the Insurance Act, and we've not reproduced the whole Act here, you'd be glad to know, but we are showing just a few edited highlights, and we've underlined some of the sections to draw your mind to the sections which we need some clarity. So a fair presentation of the risk, it's something which makes a disclosure in a manner which would be reasonably clear and accessible to a prudent insurer, and in which every material representation as to whether as to a matter of fact is substantially correct, and every material representation as to a matter of expectation or belief is made in good faith. So it's got to be clear and it's got to be made in good faith. And the disclosure required is as follows, except as provided in subsection 5. Disclosure of every material circumstance which the insured knows or ought to know, or failing that, Disclosure which gives the insurer sufficient information to put a prudent insurer on notice that it needs to make further inquiries for the purpose of revealing those material circumstances. Roger, I've read that rather quickly because this is information that most of us are quite familiar with. But bearing in mind that we're dealing with contractors, what chance does the contractor have of understanding this duty? Because we see things when they go wrong. How does the insurance industry equip the insured, in this case a contractor, to comply with these rules contained in the Insurance Act?
Well, let me start by saying, let's go back to the question of the prudent insurer, which we'll come to again in a minute. The fundamental point here is this, is that the Act quite clearly says that you've got to disclose every material circumstance which the insured knows or ought to know. But it's got to be disclosed to somebody who is known as a prudent underwriter who wants to know certain things. Now, the real question here is this. Why would anybody that's not an underwriter know what is in the mind of a prudent underwriter? Now, that is the law, and that's what we have to deal with. But the real problem is that a contractor, probably the last thing that a contractor is thinking about in his daily job is insurance. We had a case a little while ago. It's a very good example, actually, where a client said to us, when I open my packet of drugs and I'm faced with tiny little printed explanation of what these drugs are, I might read it, and I'm sure it's very informative. But I'm not a chemist. I'm a crane operator. I rely upon my doctor to tell me what I need to know, and I do it. Now, the problem with the insurance situation at the moment is that we've got the equivalent. We've got an enormous amount of paper that we expect policyholders to read. And frankly, in our experience, even if they read it, they don't really understand any more than they'd understand what the side effects of a drug are. They simply want somebody to go to and says, yes, that's all right. Do this, you'll be fine. So we're starting really from the point of, if the information that the underwriter wants has got to be clear and reasonable, then we can actually turn it the other way around and use the same expression and to say that the questions asked of a policyholder by an insurer ought to be clear and reasonably accessible to the policyholder. Michael.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Roger. It just shows the need for guidance for people who are not thinking of insurance every day of the week. Now, from time to time, we mentioned this phrase, the prudent insurer. So who or what is a prudent insurer? I'd just like to explain this. The term, the prudent insurer, is a benchmark used in common law. It presumes that an insurer is prudent, and that a prudent insurer will have asked the right questions to assess the merits of the risk. However, this benchmark was set long before the arrival of technology, at a time when proposal forms were the common currency of application for insurance, many of which were lengthy and comprehensive in their questions. Today, the opposite is true. The application process is short and unspecific in its quest to fact-find for commercial reasons. It is now more common for insurers to rely upon the Act's obligation of the insured, that is the proposer, to disclose every material circumstance which the insured knows or ought to know, in good faith, in a manner which would be reasonably clear and accessible to a prudent insurer. So the question of the reasonable customer could be, what does a prudent insurer want to know, and what is clear and accessible to him if he doesn't know my job? Therefore, in practice, it is essential to direct the mind of the proposer to the things that a prudent insurer wants to know. And the most reliable way of doing that is to ask sufficient questions in a manner which would be reasonably clear and accessible to a typical insured. Now, moving on to specifics of contractors and subcontractors, this raises the question of what is the difference in risk? What is it about contractors, bona fide subcontractors, labour-only subcontractors, and for that matter, employees, that interests the underwriter at the proposal stage? What difference does it all make? Roger, what thoughts have you got on that?
Well, I think this is where it's important for us in the industry to have the big picture in mind of what contractors and tradesmen do and the relationship they have with subcontractors. Now, we're going to, towards the end of this session, show you a diagram which I hope will help you to understand this. But the fundamental issue is that a contractor, a tradesman contractor that takes out an insurance is likely, very likely, to engage other subcontractors from time to time. And as we all know, there are principally two types. You've got labour-only subcontractor and you've got the bona fide subcontractor. Now, the point about the risk is this, that the insurer is not, of course, indemnifying the subcontractor. He's indemnifying the contractor. But what a lot of people don't realise, and including the contractors, saying this from experience, dealing with these claims, they don't realise that when they've got somebody as a subcontractor working for them, whether bona fide or labour only, it is in law very, very likely that if something goes wrong, the contractor is going to get it in the neck first, and they are going to have to deal with the claim. So what a prudent underwriter is saying to himself is, well, look, if you're the contractor, I've got a rough idea of what you do because you've told me. What I don't necessarily know is what your subcontractors are going to do. And I want to know enough about your subcontractors, what kind of subcontractors, how you use them, when you use them, that I can make a reasonable assessment of the merits of your risk. That is what he's doing. The reason is that when a claim comes along, if it has stemmed from a subcontractor, the lawyers and the insurance claims team for the contractor have got to take all this into consideration as to how they're going to manage the claim, and also how they're going to manage the claim with a view to subrogation thereafter. So if you are a subcontractor, and a lot of contractors by definition are in themselves subcontractors, they need to be properly insured. And if you're a subcontractor, you can bet your life that if something happens, it won't be the customer or the contractor that comes after you, it'll be their insurers. And they're some of the most sophisticated experts in litigation on the planet. So it's really important that in the insurance sector, what we're doing now is to, as we insure these people, we've got to make it very clear to them what the risks are, how you separate those risks, how you identify those risks, and above all, be very clear in the proposal process of ensuring that the information about what these people are doing and how and when is very, very clearly set out. The best way of doing that is asking questions, a kind of application process that leads the contractor to direct their mind to what the insurer is actually wanting to know. Don't leave it to chance.
Well, Roger, that leads us into our next slide, because we've come across a number of problems in disputed claims, and the root of the problems have almost always related to either statements of fact or questions on a proposal form, or the insured's need to make a fair presentation of the risk under the Insurance Act. And we've put here 4 examples of real-life statements or questions that the proposer has been faced with at the proposal stage. And the first one I find interesting because the proposer was asked, how many people are working in the business? Now, this actually was taken from the case that you mentioned right at the outset, Roger, where they'd got the numbers wrong. But how is a contractor to answer a question like that? Because there's no there's no guidelines provided. There's no explanation as to what the underwriter is looking for. So how do you think a contractor, Roger, would go about answering such an open question like that?
Well, I think the answer is that a lot of them don't know. And I think this is the point. How many people are working in the business? What does working in the business mean? If you are a contractor, you may be a sole practitioner. You may be in partnership with somebody else. You may be in a larger firm with a number of employees. People that you know are employees are employees. The majority of contractors, in our experience, a lot of the contractors, let's say the majority, a large number of contractors, do not understand that people they hire, which we call labour-only subcontractors, are, for all intents and purposes, employees. And tragically, there's quite a lot of brokers that don't know that as well. And certainly, online platforms asking questions like, how many people are working in the business? Well, when? What day? Is it how many are working today? How many are working on the 364th day of the policy year? What does working in the business mean? In the next question, it says the number of people working in your business does not exceed 10. That's not a question, that's a statement. Now, in a statement of fact, that question, in fact, came up in the cases that we were referring to. Does that mean the number of people working in your business does not exceed 10 today or at any time over any number of sites? If you look at if you like, the syntax of those questions, they are pretty woolly. So the question is, how do you get a policyholder to understand what's in the mind of the underwriter? What an underwriter really is saying is, I want to know how much at risk I am on any one day of the year. So if you're employing labour-only subcontractors, how many? Well, in this particular client's case, he had a red book or black book, whatever he called it, of 76 labour-only subcontractors. He never used more than half a dozen at a time, mostly. So he said. On the particular day of this fire, he happened to have 5 sites working, and he happened to have 11 people. 11, probably for the first time. In fact, we know because we did a statistic going back 10 years, and only on 2 occasions in 10 years did he have more than 7 people on site. And on this day, he had 11, and his policy was voided. Now, if an underwriter wants to know that, we say, ask the question very, very clearly. So you might say, at the time of applying for insurance, how many full-time PAYE employees do you have? You might say, how many part-time PAYE employees do you have? And you might say, do you have any other kind of employee? If so, give details of the role and the method of employment. Because I think it would be pretty difficult for anybody to not understand those questions. And what actually it's doing, it's guiding the proposer to the mind of the insurer. What he wants to know is how many employees have you got, full-time, part-time, or you call by some other name. Now, that fundamentally is what we're dealing with. It's the questions of how clear are these questions to somebody that doesn't understand insurance. Do you employ labour-only subcontractors? If so, how many? How many when? in a day, in a week, in a year? What does the underwriter want to know? Do your payments to bona fide subcontractors exceed 25% of your revenue? On a contract? On a month? In a financial year? What's he trying to find out? And if you can answer those questions if you can ask these questions more successfully, you're going to overcome the problems that we see day in, day out, where the mind of the contractor, who's doing his best to comply with telling the insurer everything he knows about the business that a prudent insurer would want to know, the insurer can help him to ask to direct his mind, then we're going to have a much more satisfactory basis of understanding.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Roger. That's really helpful. And the point or the observation I would make is that these unhelpful questions and statements are really a recipe for future argument. And I seem to remember on the case that we were looking at, we ended up with a spreadsheet over 2 or 3 years plotting the times when subcontractors were used. And it also raised the question of, are you talking of per capita, or are you talking of full-time equivalent? Because you do get a lot of part-time subcontractors. So there really is a need for much more clarity. Now, we have taken it upon ourselves to suggest 2 definitions which we would like to offer the industry. We've seen other definitions. We think it would be helpful if these could be standardized in some way, but our suggestion of a definition of a labour-only subcontractor is shown here on the slide. It's a person holding themselves out as having a trade or skill or resource required by the insured for the purpose of providing labour only and engaged by the insured to perform such services for the insured and under the control and direction of the insured as the insured directs from time to time. The person so engaged shall, for the purposes of the engagement and for this insurance, be treated as an employee of the insured. Now, we feel that presents a bit of clarity and a reminder to everybody that if you have labour-only subcontractors, that's how you define them, and you treat them as employees, and you declare them as such. Next to that, of course, are the bona fide subcontractors, or otherwise known as genuine subcontractors. So a bona fide subcontractor will be an entity, corporate or otherwise, holding itself out as having particular trade or skill or resource for the supply of materials and or equipment and labour, which is deployed independently of any other contractor under its own control and direction, and is engaged for the services of a contract price or fee, and having and maintaining such insurances as are required by law and or by the terms of any contract of its principal. So that establishes the fact that a bona fide subcontractor is in effect running his own business, and the main contractor brings them in under a contract. They don't pay them other than via a fee in accordance with the contract. Now, these definitions are contained in our fact sheet, so please do have a look at them, and maybe you can think of some way of improving these definitions. But what we're really suggesting is that we need to work on them. Sorry, Roger.
Can I just add that the reason for doing this is that it is increasingly important in the way that insurance is being distributed, that there is some consistency of terms used in our industry. Because when majority of people buy insurance, frankly, on price, the more we can standardize what they're getting for that price, the more we will remove the propensity for disputes about, we didn't mean that, we didn't intend that. The more we can have a market agreement, and it's not, this is not, in my opinion, our opinion, it's not anti-competitive, say, when we're talking about bona fide subcontractors or labour-only subcontractors or other things that we can describe, here is what the industry means by it. And I think it would be very helpful for the industry to get together and to have some kind of market agreements on things like this, simply so that the customers know what they're being required to insure. What we are saying, are you an employee? Are you working in the business? Are you one of these? In the case that we were talking earlier, we had a huge amount of debate. I mean, unprecedented amount of debate about whether some of the bona fide contractors were in fact bona fide subcontractors. Because some of them were one-man bands, but they described themselves as a bona fide subcontractor. Now, when you have a claim, and a disputed claim which is based on avoidance of a policy, that is not the time to have that kind of discussion. That's the kind of thing that should have been known before the contract was in place. It's never discussed. That's our point. So what we're looking for here is to help, and I'd say, feedback to you, the industry, the things that we come across. Here we have a 30-year-old family business was destroyed by this one case. And it wasn't even their fault. I mean, it was a faulty light. The mere fact that there was one person too many over 5 sites, not on one site, gave the insurer the right to say, we're not paying this claim, we're voiding the policy. So they had to live with voidance. Not just the fact they didn't pay the claim, they had to therefore declare voidance. And in our opinion, that was a disproportionate remedy or the accident of the fact that he was doing well in business and he had one person too many. These are the things that really matter in our industry, because these are the things that cause our reputation to be blighted. Why would you do that? So, Mike, let's move on to the next part.
Yes, I just want to throw something out for our delegates to consider. I don't think we've got time to discuss it, but we've talked about the insured's requirement to make a fair presentation. And yet we have a lot of insurances being applied for either online or through some sort of automated platform, where I suspect there isn't always the opportunity to add a narrative about the insured's own business. So there are lots of questions being asked, and they do their best to select from the drop-down options, the closest one. But if you're going to make a fair presentation, then surely it's good for you to have an opportunity. Just provide some narrative to explain what your business is, how you organize it, how you use subcontractors. And then you might be getting a little bit closer to making a fair presentation. But unfortunately, we haven't really got time to discuss that. We need to move on. And I just also want to touch on the problem of renewals, because we have seen cases where, in fact, I can think of one example. One contractor started up in business, went online to apply for the insurance, declared the turnover and the number of employees and the number of subcontractors. And I think the turnover was declared at something like £80,000, and they also declared the number of employees. This policy was renewed 4 or 5 times before a claim arose. And I think it was in the 5th policy year, it came to light that the insured had never revised those figures. Now, there may well have been a statement at renewal saying, please check the information is still valid. But there was nothing about this renewal process that really helped the insured to apply his mind to the fact that he needed to update those figures. So having started off with a turnover of about 80,000, I think his turnover by the time the claim arose was about £1.5 million. Now, we might think that's incredible, that policyholder should allow that to happen. But it did happen, and I think it's up to us in the insurance industry to find a way to, whether it's by enforcing an annual declaration or whatever it is, we need to be aware of that problem.
I think it's worth just saying that one of the problems that we come across is the drop-down box syndrome. And very often, we hear this from brokers as well, is that there isn't a description in the drop-down box which precisely fits the client's circumstances. Now, we've got oodles of examples where the broker or the policyholder has said, well, I'll take the nearest fit. I mean, one famous one was the difference between a laundry and a laundrette. We were insuring, somebody was insuring a laundry. They didn't have laundry in the drop-down box, they had laundrette. So they ticked laundrette. Now, it wasn't until the claim came along, of course, that the insurer said, well, we wouldn't have insured a laundry. But the point is, it got through the system, and everybody thought that that was fine. And these are the kind of things that we need to try to deal with. If the industry wants to have, if you like, a frictionless relationship with its customer base, you've either got to have facility for adding narrative to the question sets, or find a better set of questions to be much more precise in what you're wanting to know. Because the common get-out clause nowadays is for underwriters that say, had we known what we know now, we wouldn't have accepted the risk because our reinsurance or our facility doesn't allow it. Well, everybody in this audience knows what I'm talking about, but no policyholder in the world would understand that sentence. No. But that's the way it is. So we've got to look at the way of getting these renewals away from, please tell us if there are any changes to your business, because that doesn't focus the mind of the policyholder onto what the underwriter is really asking.
Yeah. Roger, I'm going to have a quick look at some of the questions that have come in. We've had quite a lot of questions, but before we do that, we've got 3 or 4 minutes to look at some diagrams that you've prepared. Would you like to just talk us through those, and then I'll be
very quickly. I'll do that. Yes. Now these are diagrams that we use. This is a simplified version of it, but when you get a complex claim, some of the claims we deal with have got 10, 12 or more different parts of the chain, and our client is usually one of them somewhere. So we start by drawing out a diagram of all the parties to the whole thing. Now, what is useful about this is that when we're looking at it as an insurance practitioner, we say, well, we know the client. The client's the person that's commissioning the works on the project or whatever it is. Look at the other people here and what the relationships are. You've got client engages an architect, a consulting there, and 2 consulting engineers, a direct contractual relationship. The architect will engage a cost consultant. Sometimes the client will engage a cost consultant. The client or the consulting structural engineer, maybe the project manager, will engage a contractor. Sometimes the client engages the contractor. So it's very important to know, in the scheme of things, what the relationships are between the client and the parties that are contributing, if you like, to the project. This diagram simply is just a way of, you can do this for yourself with any customer, any client you like. It's important to that. But look where the subcontractors fit. Contractor has subcontractor 1, subcontractor 2, subcontractor 3, and then contractor 1 has his own subcontractor, which the contractor probably never knows about until a claim comes along. So all of these people need to be insured, of course. Now, the contractor's point of view, this is how a contractor will very often think about the subject. The diagram that I've just shown you won't come anywhere close to the mind of typical contractor. What the contractor says, oh, I've got these people. I've got 3 labour-only subcontractors. I've got 3 bona fide subcontractors, and in themselves, one of them's got another bona fide and the other one's got labour only. Now, all of these things matter to an underwriter. A prudent underwriter actually is saying to himself, these things matter, because that tells me where my risk is. And that's why it's important for us as an industry to get this subject a little bit clearer, so there's less misunderstanding when a claim comes along. An insurance view here is we've got the contractor here with labour-only subcontractors. We've got bona fide, another bona fide, another bona fide with a subcontractor, and all of those things will tell somebody as an insurance practitioner where the risks lie, and you can actually probably write quite a good narrative about what that means and explain that to your customer. Move on to the next one. But what a lot of people say is, well, I don't think that's fair, because that means that the work undertaken as a risk of premium is paid for by the contractor, but then these other people are having to buy insurance again, so the insurance market's getting premium twice. Well, of course, you and I know that's not the case. But that is very much in the mind of a lot of subcontractors to say, why can't my contractor pay for this insurance? Why do I have to have it? Or most of you, the brokers amongst you, will have heard that. So I'm showing you here merely the kind of confusion that typically exists in the real world about contractors and subcontractors. Very complex subject, particularly in insurance law, and we understand it far better than our clients do. But as an industry, we are saying or suggesting that we're not really explaining this well enough to avoid the kind of misunderstandings that rise and very often lead to the tragedy of avoidance of policies and all the attendant problem.
So, thank you for that, Roger. Can I just say that these diagrams, if you find them helpful, they're not in our fact sheet. So if you would like copies, just send us an email and we'll be very pleased to follow up. Now, we've got lots and lots of questions here, and we won't have time to deal with them all. So we will see if we can deal with you individually after the event. But Nigel West raises a very interesting question. He says, Roger said that it would be the policyholder who would have to deal with the consequences of a claim, even if the incident occurred as a result of the actions of a subcontractor, even if a bona fide subcontractor. Why then do insurers require that the policyholder ensures that the subcontractor has their own insurance, if not to pass any claim to the responsible subcontractor's insurers?
Well, the answer to that is that what I said, and let me make this quite clear, in the event that a bona fide subcontractor causes the problem, i.e. the thing that causes the loss, the law will have it that the principal and the client, the principal, will have a legal action against his contractor. He won't have necessarily a legal nexus against the subcontractor. So it's the legal chain that makes the difference. And what the underwriter of the contractor wants to know is that if you have a subcontractor, he's worth suing by way of subrogation. That's the point. It's all about subrogation. What the insurer is saying is, I will insure you, the contractor, because if you have a claim made against you, and it is not your fault, and there's no contributory negligence or contributory contractual fault or liability, then if we're going to go after the subcontractor that did actually cause the peril, then we want to know that he's good for suing. So that's why they've got to have insurance.
Okay, next question. Peter Lennon says, what about labour masters who supply, for example, teams of bricklayers who are not directed by the main contractor? Are there any issues there?
Yeah. Well, there's massive issues there. And that's the kind of thing that's probably not dealt with very clearly in most proposal forms, because in my experience, it isn't. I mean, actually, it's not an expression which is terribly commonly known within the insurance sector. Now, but what you're describing is something that we know happens all the time. Now, the point is, that's where you need some kind of agreement with the underwriter. Right up front is, what are you insuring? What are the risks from that labour master, effectively? What are the relationships that he has with the other parties? Because if you don't know what they are before you accept the risk, you're going to have one hell of a trouble working out what they are when you've got a claim. So it's this question of the clarity. What am I insuring? How am I going to evidence the relationship that I have as a labour master with those people that I'm introducing? Who are they working for? And that's not a matter of insurance. That is a matter of fact and a matter of law. That's where I think sometimes we fall down. We try to say, well, what's the answer? Well, the answer is it's a matter of fact, not a matter of opinion. And you've got to go to the trouble of saying, well, how does he engage with these people? There will be two aspects to it. One is the simple legal principle of contract. The other one will be the HMRC view, as the way they stand in relation to the relationship of employment or self-employment. So I'm afraid there's no easy answer.
Okay, need to move on to the next one. This is more of a comment than a question. It's from James Fogg. This is about the case of declaring the number of employees. Could you not argue that over a year he has not had 11 employees for 365 days of the year? So his policy would be valid if he had 10 employees for 365 days, i.e. 3,650 days labour. Yet if he had 7 employees for 300 days and 5 for 60 days and 11 for 5 days, that's only 2,875 days labour in the year, i.e. less of a risk. It's madness. Anyway,
that was in fact very much, James, very good question, very well articulated, and that is precisely the argument we made for this particular client. The insurer said, or at least the insurer's lawyer said, none of that matters. Technically, he had 11 people, and the policy said he only has 10. And this again, I mean, you probably get to know us well enough by now that we are very passionate about what I call the spirit of the insurance contract. What you said makes absolute common sense. But the law says, well, you had 11 on one day, and technically we can void your policy because of that. The question we ask is, why would an insurer want to do that? Well, because we can. And look how much we can save. And that's the answer from the insurer, because we can. That's what they said. Oh, because we can. Our lawyer tells us we can. And I don't know what to say about that, but it doesn't do the industry any good, because your argument is the stronger one.
Yeah. Thank you, Roger. Trying to fit in a couple more questions. Our good friend Amanda Elkington says, does the main contractor still become responsible for the liability of a bona fide subcontractor claim if they are providing the initial instructions on the contract? I suppose it touches on what we were saying before, doesn't it?
Well, there's not an answer to that. And I say there's not an answer. One of the things that is really, really important to take on board in our industry now is that the law determines answers like that. As much as we might have a very good opinion, it's the law that actually eventually says what the law is in a given situation. The problem is contracts, building contracts between contractors and subcontractors, they are infinitely variable. I was talking the other day at a conference with the CIOB, Chartered Institute of Building, with the RICS and the RIBA. I'm very, very used to talking to these kinds of people on these subjects. It was a high-level summit about the problems in the insurance industry with getting insurance, CII, that kind of insurance. And it was one of the things that came out from CIOB was what their members say is the incomprehensible jargon about insurance. They just don't understand what we're saying. Now, we might all say, oh, it can't be that bad. It's not that, the point is, if you've got people out there saying our members just don't get it, they don't understand what the insurance is all about and how it works, surely we've got the most fantastic opportunity on the planet now to go out there with all the technology we've got, and we've got all the, the websites and everything, and start explaining things. What somebody said in that high-level conference was that they think, their members say, well, insurance is a trap because they ask us to tell them everything, But there's always something we won't thought of, and that's the thing they'll light upon. Now, if you've got people out there who are our customers saying that or thinking that, you've got a job to do.
Thank you, Roger. I think this might have to be the last question, but it touches on something that you and I were talking about only this morning. And Stephen Moss, referring to the case that we've cited, he says it's probably not possible, but I'd like to see the insurer in question named and shamed. I don't think I'd want to use a company with that attitude. Now, of course, this presents us with a little bit of a problem, but maybe there is a case to be made that just by sticking to the facts and just letting people know that certain insurers take a particular attitude, maybe that would be a service, at least to the broking community. But do you think that's something that
again,
you should consider?
It's a conversation we have, Mike, with our team, probably 6 times a year. In fact, we got a case yesterday. We obviously can't talk about this, but we got in a case yesterday. It was one of Mike's, and a letter from an insurer. And it is one of the most disgraceful letters we've seen written. I've seen probably about 20 years. It was arrogant, self-serving, and basically saying, we're going to punish the insured for making a mistake. We've got to teach the insured a lesson. Now, it's just not the focus that we think ought to be on insurance. We discussed, funnily enough, on this particular case, this is a case where we ought to name and shame the insurer. Because I'll tell you this, they're an offshore insurer. And it's doing our industry no damn good at all to have that kind of conduct. But of course, a lot of these insurers are commensurate with cheapness, with low price. And on the basis that the majority of consumer associations and just about everybody that talks about insurances go out and see if you can get a better price, never mind the value, you can hardly blame people for picking the lowest price because they've got no other basis of comparing, like for like. So coming back to the question, should you name and shame? It would be helpful to the industry. I think it would. But the law would probably prevent you from doing it because it would be libelous, or could be libelous. And I think the majority of insurers would, basically, especially those insurers that also say, we're going to put a gagging order. If we pay this claim, we're going to put a gagging order on you. We see several of those. And our clients sometimes take legal advice as to whether that's reasonable or not. And our view, well, it isn't reasonable, but they can do it. And you've got to make the choice. You're either gagged and accept the money, or you don't. And all I'm going to say really is you're right in what you say. I don't think the industry at the moment has a mechanism, let alone an appetite, for doing that. Because, of course, every insurer is likely to say, they're but for the grace of God go I, because there's always going to be somebody that complains about something. And you've got to be able to manage that, monitor it. Maybe the FOS or the FCA ought to have that kind of information fed to them, but I don't know. I think it's a real conundrum.
It's something I think that we would like to do. Perhaps we need to find a way, Roger, because I think it is important. And
well, it's not good for the industry. That's the point.
No, in fact, I would just, as we draw this to a close, I'll just throw in one other comment that there used to be a problem in the life insurance side of our business to do with churning. Yeah. People being told to jack in one life policy in favour of another. And I'm not too sure I'm happy with churning of home buildings and contents insurances. I think it creates far too many problems. And the consumer organisations encouraging people to switch every year. When you're insuring a building, your biggest asset, it causes so many problems with substance claims and water damage claims and all sorts of things. There is a case to be made to think very, very carefully before you start switching your buildings insurance. But we haven't got time to take that further. That's just a throwaway from me. Do contact us. And if you would like any further information, our email is there. Do watch out for our YouTube Flaxmans advice, which is really aimed at the customer, delivered in simple language. But our time is up. We'd like to thank you very much for coming along. Sorry for those questions we haven't managed to deal with. We'll see if we can pick out one or two of them and contact you direct. But from me, it's goodbye.
And from him, it's goodbye. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.